The U.S. is pulling out of Syria. What does that mean for Israel? And is North Korea really our friend now? And U.S. military recruits, too fat to fight? All this and more on today's Hot Zone.
This is the Hot Zone. Engaging with the news in a whole new way, international war correspondent Chuck Holton brings insight into areas of crisis and lets you help those affected.
Thanks for being with us. I'm Chuck Holton. So the U.S. is leaving Syria. The sudden announcement came Wednesday from the Pentagon that all 2,000 U.S. troops stationed in that country are claiming victory and leaving. ISIS has reportedly been reduced to just a few hundred fighters near Afrin. I think the Trump administration saw this as a good opportunity to disengage our forces rather than end up having them in Syria for a long, long time, where they cause lots of friction with Russia and Turkey and, of course, the Syrian government. But for some, this feels like an attempt to do what Obama did in 2009 when he precipitously pulled U.S. troops out of Iraq before the war was over. See, this is how it works with wars. You can't declare victory if the enemy hasn't declared defeat. If you do, the war might stop temporarily, but it won't end. We've seen this for more than 50 years on the Korean Peninsula, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Two things about Syria, though. This is not a pullout in the same sense that our departure was from Iraq in 2009, because we still have 6,000 troops in Iraq, and they're there for the foreseeable future, I can tell you. So I'll give Trump the benefit of the doubt here, but the real question is, what does this mean for our best friends in the region, the Kurds and Israel? The Israelis have tried to stay out of the morass in Syria as much as possible, only bombing places where the Iranians were trying to set up shop, and helping wounded Syrians who come to the border with the Golan Heights.
In March 2011, a bloody struggle broke out between the Syrian army and the rebels. Hezbollah, the Iranian army, Jabhat al-Nusra, the Islamic State, and other organizations are fighting against each other. In this intense struggle, everyone has his own agenda. To date, nearly 500,000 Syrian civilians have been killed in the fighting. Many Syrian civilians have found themselves living in the middle of the violence, though they aren't involved at all in the battle. These Syrians are like our neighbors. Some of them have lived in the area since long before the fighting began, while others are displaced persons who have arrived from deep in the Golan Heights as a result of the fighting. Nearly 400 families live in tents near the border with Israel. The reality is very complex. In the Golan Heights, there are only 3 hospitals and fewer than 10 medical clinics. There's a serious shortage of medical supplies. Additionally, the education system hasn't been able to provide the Syrian children with a formal education for several years. Most homes don't have electrical infrastructure, and in the winter, there's no oil for heating. There's also a constant shortage of food. Instead of living their lives, people worry about what tomorrow will bring. When the battle is only a few miles away, there's a lack of basic necessities. People struggle to survive on a daily basis. We, the IDF, along with the State of Israel, who cherish human life above all, couldn't stand witness to the violence in Syria and decided to reach out to our neighbors in the Golan Heights. On February 7, 2013, 7 wounded Syrians approached the border. IDF troops realized that they needed medical treatment and brought them to the hospitals in northern Israel. Over time, they treated more and more Syrians. They built the Tchelet Argaman Field Hospital, and when it was closed, the treatment was moved to other hospitals in northern Israel. Since that day, we have cared for more than 4,000 wounded Syrians and continue to take in wounded people almost every night. The humanitarian effort expanded further with the creation of the Good Neighbor Administration, together with internal organizations and private donors. We aren't only treating injured locals. We're providing humanitarian and medical aid, as well as improving our neighbors' living conditions. To date, almost 120 humanitarian aid operations have been carried out within the framework of Good Neighbor, including treatment of 550 wounded Syrians since 2016, 31 of whom have returned to Israel for treatment. We will continue to support our neighbors in the Golan Heights as long as we're able to do so and as long as they need help.
So if the commanders on the ground in Syria are saying this is the time to leave, then I believe a good presidential administration would allow them to do so regardless of the political ramifications. And the Defense Department is making clear that while we might be packing up in Syria, we're not leaving the region. And if needed, we'll be back. The Kurds are worried, though, and I think it'd be a good move for the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, or somebody to go to Erbil and give assurances that we'll still have their back. Because it wasn't all that long ago that the Kurds and Yazidis in that region were literally being exterminated, and they've always made it very clear how badly they need our help, as they did during the fight for Mosul a couple years ago. Iraqi forces continue to push into the city of Mosul, struggling to kick out ISIS once and for all. In recently liberated eastern suburbs, residents are slowly returning, only to find their homes and businesses in ruins. Iraq's second largest city, Mosul was once a multi-ethnic metropolis, with large communities of Christians, Muslims, and Yazidis living together. There were 45 Christian churches in the city, but ISIS did its best to wipe them off the map. This Assyrian Christian church is in the eastern suburb of Bartala. That's a suburb of Mosul. And you can see what happened when ISIS came in. It was burned and razed. And the people of this area are really looking forward to getting back into their homes, but this, unfortunately, is what they'll find when they get here. And you can imagine by what you see here how many years it will take to get things back to normal. Less than 10 miles away is another Christian village called Bashika. It was liberated by the Kurdish army weeks ago, but the countless number of IEDs and booby traps left behind as ISIS withdrew will make it extremely difficult for residents to return anytime soon. Masroor Barzani, Chancellor of the Kurdistan Region Security Council, says the Kurds need help to make their communities safe again.
The majority of the engineering teams working with the Peshmergas are going out there without any protection. And many of them have lost their lives because a single mistake is enough to kill you in this case. So definitely people need help. We need help. We need Americans. We need the rest of the coalition to come to our assistance to clean these areas. And these are areas that eventually civilians have to go back to and call it home.
The Chancellor holds that it's in the best interest of the United States and the world to help them win this fight.
This is a world war, but we are in the front line. But unfortunately, really, we are not being supported to the degree that we need to. We need Americans to remember that we are loyal friends and loyal allies. We share same principles and same values. We are together against international terrorism as long as it takes. And in this case, to eradicate terrorism and to fight terrorism, there are many ways that we have to work together.
From Kurdistan, I'm Chuck Holton for NRA News. The Kurds' ultimate goal is to have their own country, but that's something that neither the Syrians, the Turks, nor the Iraqis are going to allow. So don't expect a marked decrease in violence in that area anytime soon. Now, let's talk about Korea. Sanctions remain in place on North Korea as the U.S. waits for concrete evidence of nuclear disarmament by that rogue state. But while we're waiting, the South Koreans are negotiating baby steps toward peace. Now, some really historic things have been happening between the two Koreas as they demolish guard posts along the DMZ, or demilitarized zone, and have even started talking about opening a railway between the two countries. But that's something that has to be approved by the United Nations first. And that would have been absolutely unthinkable 10 years ago, or even earlier this year. So while we still probably can't trust Kim Jong-un any further than we could throw him, it appears Trump's deal-making in the region is truly paying off. But regardless of the show North Korea is making, demolishing some of its nuclear testing sites, the likelihood of that country actually disarming completely is still somewhere between slim and none. Okay, let's talk about the U.S. military. I've been reporting for some time that U.S. military recruiting is in shambles after 8 years of the Obama administration, as so few Americans are fit enough to even qualify for service, and those who are don't want to join. Now leaders are saying that those who do get in are so undisciplined that they are having to extend basic training to teach things like respecting authority and following orders. I spoke with an expert recently on this, retired Lieutenant General Jerry Boykin. I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about the state of recruiting. I want to tell you why, because my oldest son just joined the Army, And when he went to the MEP station, the entrance processing station, to take his test and everything like that, he went in with 40 people. Only 10 of them actually passed the ASVAB test. And of the 10 that were left, only 4 passed the drug test. We just saw General Mattis talk a little bit about this. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think that what you're hearing both General Mattis as well as the Commandant of the Marine Corps, General Heller, saying is that less than 30% of the youth in America today can meet the standards to come into our military, and that is they, for example, are overweight, out of shape, unable to pass a physical test, or they haven't graduated from high school, or they have felony convictions on their records, or they have psychological issues. And it's a sad state of affairs today that we have so few, such a small percentage of our population that can actually meet the requirements to serve.
Yeah, and not just that, but with all of the social engineering that went into fundamentally transforming the military throughout the Obama administration. How do you feel that that's affected people's desire to serve?
It's had a huge impact. Listen, Chuck, you know, I travel all over the country and speak at events all over the country, and I see moms and dads in every part of our society that are saying to me, you know, I don't know if I want my son or my daughter to serve in the military. This was particularly bad under Barack Obama. In the 8 years that he was the president, there were people that were very, very concerned about him, what he was doing to the military with the social experiments and the fact that there was no focus on winning the wars. Now, I will tell you that that has lessened under Donald Trump, but there are 8 years of neglect and social experiments that have so damaged our military that it's going to be hard for Trump in 4 years to reverse that trend. Although I will tell you, and I think you know this yourself, the morale went up the day after President Trump was sworn in as the President of the United States and the Commander-in-Chief.
Well, and so we've read a lot about the state of the military, like you mentioned. There was a lot of neglect throughout the 8 years of the Obama administration, and we've seen that in the readiness numbers. We've seen that in the numbers of pilots that are actually fit for duty. They say there's a shortage of 2,000 pilots. What are you hearing as far as readiness goes in the military?
Well, the 2,000 figure, that's just the Air Force. That doesn't include the other services. So it's a much bigger problem than just the 2,000 that you referred to, but there is a readiness problem. Look, sequestration and program budget cuts have cut so deeply that we are now cannibalizing from boneyards, from museums. We're getting parts to keep our planes flying. It's a terrible situation here, and keep in mind also, in the 16 years that we've been at war in Iraq and Afghanistan, we have worn our equipment out, and we don't have the money to replace it or even to repair it.
And so they're saying they want to recruit 88,000 troops this year alone. How do we do that? How do we keep drawing the best and brightest of America to serve their country when it's in that kind of state?
Yeah, well, what we don't do is we don't start lowering the standards. You know, that's been the tendency. If you can't get enough people who are high school graduates, then you lower the standards to where you don't have to be a high school graduate, or you change the physical requirements, or you know, a variety of things. That's not the right way to do it. What we have to do is we have to, number one, demonstrate to the American public that the focus is on winning the nation's wars. And we have to demonstrate, I think, to the American public, to moms and dads all over the country, to Johnny and Janie all over the country, that if you come in the military, that you will be part of something bigger than yourself. You'll be a part of something you can be proud of, and you'll be under a commander-in-chief that wants to win and will give you every opportunity to do just that.
Well, you're still fighting the good fight, and I thank you for that, General. And thanks for being with us today.
I'm glad to be with you, Chuck.
Friends, please don't treat your children like pets. Give them measured doses of hardship and misery as they grow up. Your job as a parent is to produce character, and your boys won't develop manly character by sitting on the couch and staring at a screen. Our country's desperate for more good men who will be courageous and disciplined and selfless. Don't leave it to the schools to train that into your kids. The schools might be able to make them smart, even that's questionable, but only you can make them good. We as a society need you to be disciplined enough to discipline your children. That's all for today. Thanks for being here. If you're listening to this podcast, maybe head over to YouTube and check it out on the video version sometime. And check out patreon.com/hotzone to help support this show. You'll get a lot more out of it. I'm Chuck Holton, and we'll see you back here Monday on The Hot Zone.
The Hot Zone is produced by Amy Holton and Livefire Media. Copyright 2019.